In the gleaming heart of Silicon Valley, where fortunes rise and fall with each sunrise, stood the prestigious Blackstone Tower, a monument to tech royalty. On the 42nd floor, behind walls of imported Italian marble, sat Marcus Blackstone, 28 years old, and heir to a $3 billion tech empire. His morning routine never varied. Designer shoes propped on a mahogany desk worth more than most people's cars. Scrolling through tech blogs that praised his father's company while he basked in inherited glory. The irony was delicious. Marcus had never written a single line of code in his life, yet commanded an army of developers with the casual cruelty of a medieval lord. Every morning, at precisely 7:15 a.m., Marcus's private elevator would descend to the building's exclusive lobby cafe, the Binary Bean, a boutique coffee shop his father had installed solely for executive convenience. The barista there, a quiet man named David Chen, had been serving Marcus his complicated orders for 3 years. David moved with practiced efficiency, his worn sneakers silent against the polished floors, his faded uniform a stark contrast to the $3,000 suits that paraded past his counter. What Marcus never bothered to notice were the subtle signs. The way David's fingers flew across the register's touchscreen with programmer-like precision, or how he'd occasionally sketch complex diagrams on napkins during slow periods, quickly hiding them when customers approached. This particular Monday morning would mark the beginning of something extraordinary, though not in the way Marcus anticipated. The Heir burst through the cafe doors 15 minutes early, his face flushed with excitement and rage in equal measure. In his manicured hands, he clutched the latest tech magazine, its cover story featuring Blackstone Industries' newest acquisition, a revolutionary productivity app called NeuralFlow that promised to transform workplace efficiency through AI-driven task management. The app, acquired for an undisclosed 8-figure sum just 6 months ago, was set to launch that very evening at an exclusive gala event. Marcus had spent weeks taking credit for discovering this gem, telling anyone who'd listen how his keen eye for innovation had secured the deal. The truth, hidden beneath layers of NDAs and shell companies, was far more interesting. As David prepared Marcus's usual, a triple shot, half-calf, oat milk cortado with Madagascar vanilla and exactly 2 pumps of sugar-free hazelnut, his hands trembled slightly. Not from nervousness, but from exhaustion. He'd been up until 4 a.m., not partying or gaming like others his age, but hunched over 3 monitors in his cramped studio apartment, fixing critical bugs in a codebase he knew more intimately than his own reflection. The circles under his eyes told a story of countless sleepless nights, but Marcus only saw what he wanted to see. Another service worker, another invisible cog in his privileged machine. When Marcus grabbed his coffee without acknowledgement, David's expression remained neutral, professional, a mask he'd perfected over years of swallowing pride with practiced ease. The storm began at 9 a.m. sharp. Marcus's assistant, a nervous woman who'd already been reduced to tears twice that month, knocked on the cafe door with a message that would seal David's fate for the next 14 hours. The Heir's regular barista for his afternoon meetings had called in sick. The backup had a family emergency. The third option was stuck in traffic. Marcus's solution was characteristically brutal in its simplicity. David would work a double shift. No, a triple shift. He would stay until the building closed at midnight, serving coffee to the parade of investors, journalists, and tech moguls attending the pre-launch meetings. When David's manager tried to explain labor laws, maximum shift lengths, and basic human decency, Marcus made a single phone call to his father. Within minutes, the manager received a text from corporate. Accommodate Mr. Blackstone's request. All overtime approved. In the gleaming heart of Silicon Valley, where fortunes rise and fall with each sunrise, stood the prestigious Blackstone Tower, a monument to tech royalty. On the 42nd floor, behind walls of imported Italian marble, sat Marcus Blackstone, 28 years old and heir to a $3 billion tech empire. His morning routine never varied. Designer shoes propped on a mahogany desk, worth more than most people's cars, scrolling through tech blogs that praised his father's company while he basked in inherited glory. The irony was delicious. Marcus had never written a single line of code in his life, yet commanded an army of developers with the casual cruelty of a medieval lord. Every morning at precisely 7:15 a.m., Marcus's private elevator would descend to the building's exclusive lobby cafe, the Binary Bean, a boutique coffee shop his father had installed solely for executive convenience. The barista there, a quiet man named David Chen, had been serving Marcus his complicated orders for 3 years. David moved with practiced efficiency, his worn sneakers silent against the polished floors, his faded uniform a stark contrast to the $3,000 suits that paraded past his counter. What Marcus never bothered to notice were the subtle signs, the way David's fingers flew across the register's touchscreen with programmer-like precision, or how he'd occasionally sketch complex diagrams on napkins during slow periods, quickly hiding them when customers approached. Hour by hour, David's ordeal unfolded like a carefully orchestrated torture. The morning rush gave way to lunch service, where Marcus paraded a stream of investors through the cafe, each demanding increasingly complex orders, while Marcus regaled them with stories of his business acumen. David's hands moved on autopilot: pull, steam, pour, repeat, while his mind wandered to places Marcus couldn't imagine. Behind those tired eyes, algorithms danced, and code structures realigned themselves. He thought about the elegant recursion function he'd written 3 years ago, the one that had solved a problem Google's engineers had deemed computationally impossible. He thought about the neural network architecture that had taken 6 months to perfect, training it on millions of data points he'd scraped and cleaned himself. Most of all, he thought about the email he'd sent 18 months ago to a small acquisition firm, attaching a demo that would eventually find its way to Blackstone Industries through a labyrinth of intermediaries. By hour 8, David's legs shook from standing. Marcus noticed not with concern, but with a peculiar satisfaction. He actually brought a group of young executives to the cafe, specifically to observe what he called real dedication to customer service. He stood there, designer shoes planted firmly on the marble floor, gesturing at David like a zoo exhibit while explaining his philosophy on maximizing human resources. The young executives laughed nervously, uncomfortable but unwilling to challenge the boss's son. One of them, a recent MIT graduate, kept staring at David with a puzzled expression, as if trying to place a half-remembered face from somewhere important. David kept his head down, focusing on the endless stream of lattes and cappuccinos, each one perfect, despite his exhaustion. A perfectionism born from years of debugging code where a single misplaced character could crash entire systems. As afternoon bled into evening, the cafe transformed into Marcus's personal stage for the pre-launch festivities. Tech journalists arrived in waves, each one eager for exclusive details about NeuralFlow. Marcus held court at the largest table, his laptop open to the app's sleek interface, demonstrating features with the practiced ease of someone who'd memorized a script but never understood the underlying mechanics. He spoke of revolutionary algorithmic approaches and paradigm-shifting user experience design, while David, just 10 feet away, bit his tongue hard enough to taste blood. Every feature Marcus bragged about, every line of code he took credit for understanding, had been born in David's cramped apartment during stolen hours between coffee shifts. The barista watched his creation being paraded like a stolen child, each demonstration a dagger twisted deeper into his exhausted psyche. Hour 12 arrived with a cruel flourish. Marcus's father, Richard Blackstone himself, entered the cafe with an entourage of board members. The patriarch's eyes swept over David without recognition, just another service worker in his empire of thousands. Richard ordered a simple black coffee, but Marcus insisted David prepare something special to commemorate the launch. As David's trembling hands crafted an intricate latte art design, muscle memory taking over where consciousness failed, he overheard Richard discussing the app's mysterious creator. "Whoever built this is a genius," the elder Blackstone mused. "The code is absolutely elegant. I've had my best engineers studying it for months, and they're still discovering new layers of sophistication." Marcus nodded knowingly, implying understanding he didn't possess, while David's hand slipped, sending hot milk splashing across his already stained apron. In the 13th hour, something shifted in the atmosphere. A group of senior developers from Blackstone Industries had arrived for the final pre-launch review. Unlike the executives and journalists, these men and women spoke in the language of actual technology. They discussed buffer overflows and time complexity, debated the merits of different sorting algorithms, and marveled at NeuralFlow's unprecedented optimization. One of them, a veteran programmer with 30 years of experience, kept returning to the coffee counter, not for more caffeine, but to study David with increasing interest. He noticed the way David's eyes tracked their technical discussions, the subtle nod when someone correctly identified a particularly clever piece of the architecture, the slight frown when Marcus completely misexplained a core feature. The programmer pulled out his phone, typing furiously, cross-referencing something that made his eyes widen with sudden realization. As the clock approached midnight, David's 14-hour sentence neared its end. His uniform was stained with the evidence of 1,000 coffees, his hands raw from constant washing, his spirit nearly broken from watching his life's work attributed to someone who couldn't even spell algorithm correctly. Marcus, drunk on attention and actual champagne, decided to end the night with one final power play. He gathered the remaining guests around the coffee counter, raising his glass in a mock toast to David, praising him for showing what real work looks like, and suggesting that maybe someday, with enough dedication, even a barista could understand what we've built here. The crowd laughed uncomfortably. David stood perfectly still, a statue of exhausted dignity, his eyes fixed on something beyond Marcus's shoulder, a notification on the senior programmer's phone that would soon change everything. The senior programmer's name was Catherine Walsh, and she had just uncovered the tech world's best-kept secret. Her phone screen displayed a 2-year-old Stack Overflow thread, where someone named D. Chen, 92, had solved a problem that had stumped Microsoft's entire AI division. The solution was elegant, revolutionary, and used the exact same unique approach that formed NeuralFlow's core architecture. Her eyes moved between her phone and David's exhausted face, pieces of a massive puzzle suddenly snapping into place. She remembered now the mysterious developer who'd turned down offers from Google, Tesla, and Apple, choosing instead to remain anonymous while releasing open-source solutions that had quietly revolutionized machine learning. The ghost in the machine had been serving coffee in Blackstone Tower all along. As the launch party guests began filing toward the main auditorium for the midnight reveal, Catherine lingered. She watched David slowly remove his apron, his movements mechanical after 14 hours of servitude. But she also noticed something else, the way he glanced at the screens, displaying NeuralFlow's interface with the protective concern of a parent watching their child from afar. She pulled up more evidence on her tablet, patent filings under shell companies, GitHub commits with timestamps matching the binary bean's closing hours, and most damning of all, a metadata trace in NeuralFlow's source code that contained commented-out signatures reading D. Chen, original build V10. Her hands shook as she screenshot everything, knowing she held dynamite that could obliterate the evening's carefully orchestrated narrative. In the auditorium, 500 of Silicon Valley's elite gathered for the official NeuralFlow launch. Marcus stood at the podium, his confidence inflated by champagne and inherited privilege, ready to cement his reputation as a tech visionary. Behind him, a massive screen displayed the app's logo, a design David had sketched on a coffee-stained napkin 2 years ago during a particularly slow afternoon. Richard Blackstone sat in the front row, beaming with paternal pride, while journalists prepared their glowing profiles of the young innovator who'd brought such brilliance to the family empire. Nobody noticed Catherine Walsh connecting her laptop to the presentation system through a back door. She'd discovered a back door that, ironically, David had built into his own creation for emergency debugging. And absolutely nobody noticed. David Chen himself, standing in the back corner shadows, finally off his shift but unable to leave, drawn by the same morbid fascination that makes people watch train wrecks in slow motion. Marcus began his presentation with practiced arrogance, clicking through slides that detailed his vision for neural flow. He explained complex features with the hollow confidence of someone reciting memorized lines, occasionally fumbling technical terms in ways that made the actual engineers in the audience wince. Then, mid-sentence, the screens flickered. Catherine's evidence began appearing: the Stack Overflow posts, the GitHub commits, the patent trails, and most devastatingly, a security camera footage she'd pulled from the Binary Bean's own system. The footage showed David, after hours, alone in the cafe, working on a laptop covered in programming stickers, his screen clearly showing NeuralFlow's development environment. The timestamp read 18 months ago, a full year before Blackstone Industries had discovered the app. The auditorium erupted into chaos. Richard Blackstone's face transformed from pride to confusion to volcanic rage as he processed what he was seeing. Marcus stood frozen at the podium, his mouth opening and closing like a fish drowning in air, watching his constructed identity crumble in real time. Journalists who'd come to write puff pieces suddenly had the tech scandal of the year. The screen continued its relentless revelation. Email threads between David and the intermediary company that had sold the app. Contracts signed with David Chen clearly visible before being transferred through shell companies, and a particularly damning video from Marcus's own Instagram showing him bragging about the app while David was visible in the background, serving coffee with dark circles under his eyes from coding all night. Catherine Walsh took the stage, her voice cutting through the chaos with the authority of someone who'd just rewritten the night's narrative. She pulled up NeuralFlow's source code on the main screen, pointing out signatures, commenting styles, and architectural decisions that bore David's unmistakable fingerprint. She showed how the app contained Easter eggs, hidden features that spelled out DChen when certain combinations were pressed, timestamps that matched David's work schedule at the Binary Bean, and most brilliantly, a hidden function that would activate only when specific conditions were met. Catherine triggered it now, and the app displayed a simple message, created by David Chen. Not for sale, not for glory, for the love of elegant code. The room fell silent, 500 powerful people simultaneously turning to stare at the exhausted barista standing in the shadows. Richard Blackstone's movement through the crowd was like Moses parting the Red Sea, tech titans stumbling over themselves to clear a path. He reached David not with the fury everyone expected, but with something far more dangerous: cold, calculating business acumen. The elder Blackstone had built his empire by recognizing genuine talent, and he was staring at perhaps the greatest programmer of the generation, one who'd been hidden under his nose, serving his son overpriced coffee for 3 years. The contrast was Shakespearean. Marcus, who'd never created anything, collapsing into a chair as his facade shattered, while David stood tall despite his exhaustion, finally visible as the genius he'd always been. Richard's face cycled through emotions: anger at being deceived, embarrassment at his son's fraud, but above all, desperate recognition that he needed David Chen more than David had ever needed Blackstone Industries. What followed was Silicon Valley's version of a coronation. Venture capitalists who'd ignored David's emails years ago now thrust business cards at him with trembling hands. The journalists pivoted their stories in real time, transforming from Marcus Blackstone's triumph to the barista who fooled Silicon Valley. Job offers materialized from thin air, Google's CEO personally called. Having been watching the launch stream, Apple's head of development sent a contract with a blank space where David could write his own salary. But David's expression remained unreadable, his exhausted eyes taking in the scene with the detached interest of someone watching actors perform a play he'd written but no longer cared about. He looked at Marcus, crumpled and broken, stripped of his inherited armor, and felt not satisfaction, but a hollow emptiness. Revenge, he realized, tasted surprisingly bitter when served cold after 14 hours of making coffee. The final reversal came not with fanfare, but with quiet dignity. David walked slowly to the podium where Marcus had stood minutes earlier, his coffee-stained uniform a stark contrast to the designer suits surrounding him. Without speaking, he didn't need words. He pulled out his own laptop, a battered machine held together with duct tape and determination. His fingers flew across the keyboard with the speed and precision that had been hidden behind the coffee counter for 3 years. On the screen, he pulled up not just neural flow, but 17 other applications, all revolutionary, all unpublished. The crowd gasped as they realized they weren't looking at just one hidden genius, but at someone who could single-handedly transform the entire tech industry. Then, in a move nobody expected, David began deleting them. One by one, years of work vanished into digital oblivion. The message was clear. He'd rather destroy his creations than let them be stolen, misrepresented, or attributed to someone who'd never understand their beauty. As David headed for the exit, leaving behind a room full of billionaires frozen in shock, Richard Blackstone made one last desperate attempt. He offered everything: CEO position, unlimited resources, his own son's inheritance. But David simply pulled out his phone, showing a message he'd received during the presentation. It was from a small educational nonprofit that built free coding programs for underprivileged youth. They'd seen the stream, recognized his genius, and offered him a position teaching the next generation's salary, $40,000 a year, barely more than he made serving coffee. David's finger hovered over accept as he looked back at the room full of Silicon Valley's elite, at Marcus's devastated face, at Richard's desperate eyes. Then he pressed it, choosing purpose over profit, passion over power. The last image burned into everyone's retina was David Chen, exhausted but unbowed, walking out of Blackstone Tower as something more powerful than any CEO or heir, a free man who'd chosen his own worth over their evaluation of it.